Front Desk, Chapter 25. As Lupe was leaving the motel, a car pulled in and someone got out. My dad and I went out to greet her. It was another immigrant. My mother's face softened when she saw it was a woman this time. Aunt Ling was a friend of Uncle Lee's, and she was so famished she practically inhaled the dumplings my mother made at dinner. "Eat up, there's plenty here," my mother said, even though I knew that wasn't really true. In between bites, the woman told us where she'd been working, at a nail salon down in Irvine, California. "Irvine," my dad said. "That's supposed to be nice." "Isn't that by the beach?" my mom asked. "Well, I never got to see it," Aunt Ling said. "I spent the entire time hunched over kneeling on the floor." She told us how she would hold the hands of wealthy American women as they complained right in front of her about their Chinese maids and how they were probably taking things because don't they all steal? It was like I wasn't even there. They didn't even see me, she said. I was just a nail clipper to them. My aunt reached for Aunt Ling's hand. "Well, we see you," she said. My mother and I led Aunt Ling over to room 1, our best room. Aunt Ling was so touched by our hospitality, the next day she insisted on doing my mother's nails. "Oh, that's very nice of you, but it's not necessary," my mother said bashfully, tucking her hands under her armpits to hide them from Aunt Ling. "Let me see," Aunt Ling insisted. "Don't be shy." "Yeah, Mom, come on, let's see," I said. Reluctantly, my mom put her hands out in front. We gasped. My mother's once shiny, smooth fingernails were now dry, yellow, and rough. The cleaning supplies she used every day to clean the rooms must have somehow seeped through her gloves and into her nails. Her nails were practically melting off her hands. "It's been like this for weeks," my mom said, tears coming to her eyes. "I don't know what to do. It's all that Ajax and bleach." "Don't panic, I know just the thing," Aunt Ling said. She got up and went into the kitchen, where she grabbed a cut-up lemon from the fridge and baking soda from the cupboard. Next, she filled 2 bowls of warm water. She put the baking soda in the bowls and soaked my mom's hands in them. After half an hour, she lifted each hand up and scrubbed the nails with the lemon. I watched as she worked, scrubbing and drying, polishing and cleaning. When she was finally done, the nails looked transformed. She was able to get rid of most of the roughness, and what she couldn't get off, she covered up with a coat of glossy, red nail polish. My mom was beaming. "Quick, take a picture," my mom said. I smiled and kneeled down before her and Aunt Ling. I pretend clicked with my finger as my mother held her beautiful manicured hands out to the camera. "Eggplant," I said. As we waited for my mother's nail polish to dry, I asked Aunt Ling where she was headed to next. "Sacramento," she announced. "There are some new nail salons opening up there." "You're going to Sacramento?" I asked. One of the addresses from that ledger was in Sacramento. I leaped out of my chair and raced over to the front desk to get the ledger. "Can you do me a favor? Can you swing by this address? I need you to check something out for me." Aunt Ling promised she'd go by the address when she got up to Sacramento. If the Thunderbird were there, she'd call me right away. Before she left, she asked my mom whether she could tell any of her friends about the Cala Vista. They could really use a place to stay. Their boss gave them the boot, and they're living out of their cars, she said. "Oh, that's hard," my mom said, grimacing. "We've been there." My parents exchanged a look. "The only thing is our boss, Mr. Yao," my dad said. "He lives right here in Anaheim." "Sometimes he doesn't come for weeks, though," I reminded them. "He has motels all over the place." Aunt Ling put a well-manicured finger to her chin. "You know what would be great? If you guys had a sign or something for when he's here," she thought out loud. "You mean a don't come in sign?" I chuckled. Yeah, but not something he'd understand, she said. A secret sign that only we understand. I looked around the front desk. My eyes fell on an old blue Yankees baseball cap. I picked it up. How about this? I asked Aunt Ling. Her eyes widened. Yes, she exclaimed. That's perfect. Chapter 26. It was agreed that from now on, if we put the blue hat on the front desk, it meant don't come in, Mr. Yao's there, and no hat meant come on in. We all shook hands on the new system, and Aunt Ling got into her car and drove off. I hoped she would tell all her friends, and we would soon get lots of visitors who were heading in the direction of the 4 remaining addresses. Lupe was delighted to hear I was marching forward with my plan to show, not tell. She came over again the next day after school. The 2 of us sat at the front desk, where, as usual, she proceeded to draw trees. Why are you always drawing those things? I asked her. Lupe didn't look up. Her eyes were completely focused on the page. Today she was drawing a massive oak with tiny little lines in the trunk. I like trees, she said, shading in the bark. She didn't just like trees. She was obsessed with drawing them and was really good at it too. There was so much detail in her creations, hundreds of twigs and branches and leaves, which she would labor over for hours. She pulled out a blank piece of paper from the fax machine. Here, I'll teach you, she said. I looked at her wary. I wasn't exactly what you call artistic. My idea of a good portrait was a smiley face with sunglasses. You want to start off with the trunk, she said, pointing to my paper. I did as I was told and drew 2 thick lines for my trunk. Not so straight, she said. She took her pencil and started making little vertical lines, lumps and curves in my trunk. No tree is perfect, remember that, she said. That's what gives it character. I smiled at Lupe and how grown up she sounded. It was one of the things I liked the most about her. She showed me how to add branches to my trunk. According to her, the easiest way to draw branches and twigs was to make lots and lots of tiny little V's. It was hard work making all those little V's, and I got a little impatient, so I started shading in my tree, eager to get on with it. Don't rush, Lupe said, frowning at my shading and pointing to the tiny little twigs on her own tree. See, it's all in the detail. We worked side by side for an hour, neither of us saying anything except occasionally to borrow the eraser. So deep were we into our drawings that we nearly jumped when Hank came and knocked on the door. I buzzed him in. Hey, can I have Mr. Yao's number? Hank asked. What for? I asked him. Didn't you say he had all those other motels? Maybe he needs a handyman, Hank said. You want to ask Mr. Yao for a job? I asked. I glanced at Lupe, But what? Hank asked. He leaned into me. Come on, Mia, I'm desperate. I wanted to tell him it didn't matter how desperate he was. Mr. Yao was not going to go for it. Not after all the horrible things he said that night when the car got stolen. But then I looked into Hank's eyes. He was the one who first warned me about Mr. Yao. There's no way he would be asking me this if he had any other option. So I dialed the number and handed him the phone. It's ringing, I told him. As Hank picked up the phone and started talking to Mr. Yao, Lupe and I hopped off our stools and went to my room. Gently, I picked up the extension. Hi, Mr. Yao. It's Hank Caleb calling from the Cala Vista, Hank said. What do you want? Mr. Yao asked, barely hiding the irritation in his voice. I just want to call you to see if you might need a handyman at one of your motels, Hank said. Why, you know somebody? Mr. Yao asked. Yeah, me, Hank told him. I spent a summer painting houses. I'm good with power tools. I know how to use a pressure hose. Mr. Yao cut him off and told him flat out he wasn't interested. The answer is no, Mr. Yao said. But, Mr. Yao, you didn't even let him finish, I interjected. I don't need to let him finish. There's nothing handy about Hank. Only ma fan, Mr. Yao said, and hung up. I avoided Hank's gaze as I walked back to the front office. What's ma fan mean? He asked. I don't know, I lied. I couldn't bring myself to say that ma fan meant in Chinese meant trouble.